Hello guys, welcome to another UI inspirations video. After about a month, I am back with something special for you. This time we're going to be redesigning the Spotify app for iOS 11, but as you can see for the title of the video, this video is about the entire process. We're going to take you step by step so you can do this as well at home. But also, if you don't want to learn anything, if you just want to see how this is being redesigned, head over to this link over here, I don't know, and check it out. You know, it's going to be the speed art of the entire process, so you just see something beautiful being created. I think it's beautiful. Without further ado, let's just get started with this great tutorial. Now that we have talked a little bit about what we're going to do during this section, what this section is going to be about, it's time for us to start creating the design for this Spotify app. But before we open Adobe Experience Design, there is one thing that I always do, and that is to get all of the resources that I'm going to be using throughout the design of the application. And that usually is divided into three categories. One is the colors that we're going to be using. Two is the icons that we're going to be using. And three is the images that we're going to be using. So when it comes to colors, it's going to be easier if you have the idea of redesigning a current app, a current brand that already exists. So for example, in the case of the Spotify app, is quite a famous brand, so you will be actually able to find it in findguidelines.es, which is kind of like a very useful web page that has a list of many different kinds of famous brands that you may want to use, and that, for example, has a Spotify right here. And when you click on it, you get redirected to Spotify's own developer design resources. So in this PDF file that it's opened, you can actually find the color for the Spotify green. Right here we have the hexadecimal value, which is exactly the one that we're going to need. And we don't have any other colors, but we have this black color that Spotify uses and some white colors, so those are going to be easy to create. So we have that covered now. The next thing that we have to cover is the icons. The icons that we're going to be using throughout the application. And the website that I use to get those icons is icons8.com. Some icons, I can redesign them myself if they are not that hard, if they are very easy to create using, the pen tool or even some ellipses and some rectangles. But basically, you can find virtually any single kind of icon that you may want inside of Icons 8. So let's go ahead and download the icons that we're going to be using. The first one is going to be kind of like a today icon. And we can search like that, just today. And you can see how we can actually filter these icons by type or kind of like by style. And I like the material style a lot, so let's go ahead and search for that. And search one of the icons that I may find useful for this. Now I feel like none of these are like what I'm looking for, so let me just try to search for home. And actually I found that the news icon is the one that resembles a bit better what I'm looking for. Now for this, I actually want to change the color to be white because the background for the navigation page, actually this is going to be one of the icons for the navigation page. So mainly the background of the entire application is going to be black, so I want this to be white. Inside of Icons 8, you'll be able to change the size in which you're going to be downloading this icon. Usually you will only have the option to download up to 100 pixels, maybe 150 pixels. Some icons that are very popular are available at 512 pixels as well, but 96 pixels is going to be quite good for this case. You can click on download and there it is. The next thing that I'm going to be needing is an Explorer. So let's actually go ahead and search for Explorer. Actually, the icon that I find will be useful is this music record one, and I will download it. The online icon is also going to be useful for this Spotify redesign. The music folder icon will also be useful, as well as the search icon. Now, all of these are going to be for the tab bar that is going to be at the bottom of the application, but we're also going to be needing things like actually the settings icon, which is right here. Very likely, because this is a music app, we're going to need the play button, the skip to start icon, the repeat, and the shuffle, probably the playlist as well. And I know that we're going to be needing the camera icon. So this is pretty much it for the icon section. You can of course download as many icons as you want, or as little icons as you want. The next thing that we have to do is get some images. Now for this Spotify scenario, the ideal thing is to search for the art of the albums that you would like to see inside of Spotify. In case you're doing the design for something else, Pexels is actually a very good library of photos that you can use to search for pretty much any kind of photo, really. So this is actually a very good library that I recommend for you to use in case you want to search for something else. In this case, since we're searching for, or since we're using the art for certain albums, music albums, the ideal thing is to just Google the albums that you would like to see featured on your design. Once you have all the images that you want, you're ready to go. So in the next lecture, we're going to start by defining the tab bar and the status bar of our application. Now that we have the resources that we're going to be using throughout the entire design of our application, it's time to start designing the application. So of course, the first thing that we have to do is open Adobe Experience Design. And here, the template that we're going to be using in this case is an iPhone template. And I like to use the iPhone 7 or 6 Plus because that's the phone that I have. So when I test this design into my phone, it just looks better. So the first thing that I do always when I create one design is to save it immediately. So with just typing Command S on my keyboard, I can save it, and I usually save it on my Creative Cloud files on a file called Designs, where I have all of the designs that I have created throughout the months about Experience Design. And this one, I will just call it Spotify iOS 11 Redesign. Click Save, and now we're good to go to start doing some changes. I also always start by changing the name of the main artboard that we have, because I just don't like that default name, like it makes no sense, and I start defining everything else. Actually, the first thing that I do is get the colors that I'm going to be using. So we already have the colors. We mentioned that we're going to be using this green, we're going to be using black, and we're going to be using white. So always, as a good practice, is to have all of the colors available on the small color library that exists on every file. So what I always do is start adding the colors to this library. So for example, this white color that is by default here, I can select it and just click on this little add button, and it is barely noticeable in here because it's white and the background is white, but it's right there, easy to get it whenever I need it. And then I can add this green color that I just copied from the Spotify PDF file and add it to the library as well. And then add this black color that is actually not going to be entirely black. I'm going to use 22, 22, 22 color as the black, not an entirely zero black. And so add it to the library as well. And now I have all of the three colors that I'm going to be using throughout the design. The next thing that I want to do is create the tab bar that is going to be displayed into most of the screens. So I'm going to zoom in into this bottom part of the screen, and I'm going to start defining the 5 elements that are going to be inside of the tab bar. So this tab bar is going to have 5 tabs. I am going to need 5 rectangles, actually perfect squares. And these squares can be about 35 pixels by 35, and I can lock this actually by setting first 35 by 35, unlock this so it is always a perfect square. And I'm going to need 5 of this, so I am going to just duplicate this into 5 different elements. And the way I always do this is grab the one in the middle and center it using this icon on the top right corner. So it's now entirely perfectly centered into the middle of the screen. And I always like to set a spacing from the bottom up of about 30 pixels. So if this is 7 and 1 in Y, I'm going to set this to 671. So it's 30 pixels from the bottom up. Actually, I think this is a little bit too much. I'm going to make this only 25 like this. And the next thing is to align the one at the leftmost part of the screen with this one which is in the center, align it so it is at the same height. And I usually set this to be at about 40 pixels from the left. And do the same thing with the one at the rightmost part of the screen. And I'm going to put it all the way to the right. And I am going to subtract 40 pixels. So it is also 40 pixels from the right of the screen, just like this one is 40 pixels from the left. And to easily get these other two elements perfectly aligned, it is as simple as just aligning them so they are all at the same height, and then selecting them all and typing this distribute horizontally icon. That what it's going to do is set the exact same spacing between all of these elements. So it's going to take the leftmost item, the rightmost item, divide the spacing between them into the amount of spaces needed, in this case 4 spaces, and it's going to assign them between the required elements. And so now this is perfectly aligned. Of course, another thing that we need is to get rid of the border, because we're not going to be needing the border. And finally, we can navigate to our downloads folder where we have all of the icons that we're going to be using and start dragging the elements. For example, I know that the first one that I'm looking for is the one with the news icon, and I drag it all the way over here, and then suddenly I have this news icon. The next one that I want is this one with the record. Then I want the one with, actually the music is over here, and then I have this for the radio. And finally, I have one for search over here. And so now I have all of the 5 elements that I need, and I can zoom back out to see how this looks. This may look a little bit bigger than I thought, so I can always zoom back in and select all of these elements and change its size to probably 25 by 25. And so I will have to do things all over again, starting with setting this. Well, this is actually pretty well at 40, but I want this to be a little bit more to the bottom. So I'm going to subtract 25 from this value, so that is going to be 686. And then I'm going to move all of these elements down, and then I'm going to set this right into the center, and this is going to be all the way here, but with a 40 spacing from the right. So subtract 40 from this value, select all of these elements again, and distribute horizontally. Zoom back out, and I think this looks way better now. Now, to be able to differentiate this from the rest of the screen, I can actually add a rectangle right about here at the middle that is going to be setting kind of like a different tone for the navigation bar. So I am going to move this all the way to the back, and I of course have to change, I'm going to delete its border, and I'm going to change its value. It's not going to be this black, it has to be a little bit different, so we can see that this is in fact the tab bar, and I'm going to set this to 55, 55, 55. Actually, let's try 34s, and that looks very well. And finally, I am going to change the opacity of these elements to be about 50, because these are not the ones that are selected. So this is the one that is currently selected, and so is the one that should be fully white. Next, to add the status bar, what I can do is actually open one of the UI kits, in this case the Apple iOS UI kit, and search for one of the status bar that already exists. For example, this one that is right here, I can just copy it, close this, paste it, and it is right here. Of course, this is smaller and this is iOS 10, but I can always align this and select the elements and drag them all the way to the right like this, and select these elements and move them all the way to the left, and make some changes to make this look a little bit more like what we have seen on the previews for iOS 11. For instance, one of the things that we could do is select this battery and make this border a little bit like this at 50, so it looks a bit more like what we see on iOS 11. Another thing that we may need is change this Bluetooth icon to be entirely white. And the most important change is that these circles are no longer circles. So I'm going to delete this. And what I'm going to do is add some rectangles in here. So I am going to add some rectangles that are going to have no border, that are going to still be white, but are going to have some radius into the corners, maybe something like this. And I'm going to have 4 of this with a small spacing between them. And of course, they have to be of different sizes. So this will have to be something like this. So we have the 4 different sizes that iOS uses, and it is not perfect, but it looks more like what we see on iOS 11. And finally, let me just align this a little bit to the left and zoom back out to see how this is looking. And I think it looks very well. I'm still not convinced about the navigation bar, but we can always change it later. Right now, we have the navigation bar ready, as well as the status bar. So we have started to define this UI for our iOS application, our Spotify iOS 11 application. The thing that we are going to cover during this video is how we can navigate from each of these tabs. Now, it's going to be very simple. You should know how to do this already, but just in case you were doing it a little bit different, I'm going to show you how I do this. So the obvious thing is just to duplicate this item. So I am just going to select the entire artboard that we have and type on my keyboard Ctrl D, which will duplicate the element. And I'm going to do this 5 times, one for each, actually just 4 times because we already had one. So we have one artboard for each of the tabs that we are going to have in the bottom. So this is 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now with this, we already have all of the artboards necessary to showcase each of the pages that is going to conform our Spotify application. But to create the navigation, the first thing that we have to do is make sure that the user knows in which tab they are on, of course. And for that, all we have to do is change the opacity of these elements. If you remember, in the last section, we set the opacity of the selected item, which in this case was the first one, to remain at 100%, but all of the others were changed to 50. So in this case, all we have to do is set the second tab to 100 and set the first tab to 50. And do so accordingly with the rest of the artboard. So for the third artboard, we would set the item in the middle to have 100% opacity and head back to a 50% opacity for the first one, and so on and so forth. So at the end of doing this, you will actually have the UI ready for you to start implementing the navigation. This way the user will know exactly in which page they are on when they are performing the navigation in here. So here it goes. We have the UI ready. The next thing we have to do, as you may already know, is navigate to the prototype tab, where we are going to define the navigation between all of these elements. And it's going to be quite simple. We're going to select the second element, and actually to do it a little bit easier, we're going to just click on it instead of dragging, just clicking on it and select the artboard in here. In this case, the one that we want to navigate to is the main one. We could also change the name of this. Actually, let's do that. I'm going to change this to be news. Let me change this caps news. Or actually, I don't remember if it's supposed to be called news, but let's keep it that way. And this is going to be albums. Or actually, this is going to be, I remember, this is going to be the explore. This is going to be the today. This is going to be radio. This is going to be library. And this one is just going to be search. So there we have it. Now we have to head back here, and the navigation has already been set. To explore, we have the dissolve. It's important to have the transition set to dissolve because this is just changing from one tab to another. It doesn't have to have any push or any slides, because if you go to your phone and navigate from tab to tab, you don't see any other animation. That's just changing what's inside of the main section of the page. And we can left the duration as 0.4 seconds. That's okay. For this one, we're going to change the navigation to the radio artboard. Then this is going to go to the library, and this one is going to go to search. And so we can move over here and set the navigation of this to the today tab. This is going to be to the radio, this to the library, and this one to the search, and so on and so forth. So you get the idea. So continue to do this with the rest of the artboards. So in the next lecture, we have the navigation complete and ready for us to start implementing the first view, which is going to be the today view that we already have, and that is going to be the first one to be displayed when the application is run. Now that we have this navigation ready, it's time for us to start actually implementing the design inside of each of these tabs. Before moving forward, I wanted to do a slight change to the status bar because I really don't like the way that this signal looks, and I believe that the battery is just too much to the right. So let me go ahead and change it. And in the meanwhile, we're actually going to implement a symbol so we can actually reuse whatever we design here. So what we're going to do is actually delete. Actually, let me go back to the design tab. We're going to delete each and every one of these status bars except the one in the first tab. So we're left with only one of this. That is the one that we're going to be using as a symbol in just a second. So the first thing that I want to do is change that alignment or that spacing, because I believe that this is just too much to the right. So I'm going to select these elements. I'm going to move this just a little bit to the left. Another thing that I want to do is change the size of these elements so they are not as wide. Maybe with a tree it looks a little bit better. And then let me correct the spacing between them so they are a little bit more together. Something like this. We can keep the separation in 2 pixels like this. And let me zoom back to, yeah, this looks way better. Now what we can do to make this a symbol. Now a symbol, what it's going to allow us to is to have a certain element that is always the same and that we can start to reuse. And for example, it's very important with this one because we can actually go ahead, navigate to the symbols tab, click on add, and now the entire status bar has become a symbol. The good thing about this is that we can go ahead to any of the other tabs and drag this symbol down and put it where it belongs. Something like this. And I know that this has to be at 9 and this has to be 2.5. And the good thing about this is that any change that I do into any of these symbols or the symbol on anywhere in the design, it's going to affect the entire symbol along the entire design. So I will just continue to do this by doing this to 9 and 2.5 in each and every one of the artboards. So let's say that I want to change the spacing between one of these elements because, for example, this Bluetooth icon is bugging me just a little bit. I believe it has to be a little bit more to the left. So instead of going to each and every one of these status bars, all I can do is modify how this Bluetooth symbol is being displayed, move it a little bit to the left, and let me make just another change in here so it's a little bit easier to identify it. I believe that this has to be a little bit to the left as well, And just for the sake of displaying those changes, I am going to delete the Wi-Fi icon. And if I zoom back, notice that in every one of the elements, the spacing has changed. And the most noticeable change, of course, is that the Wi-Fi icon is now gone. So to start defining the today view, the first thing that we have to do is make sure that we have the correct fonts installed. So I have added a couple of resources into this lecture for you to be able to download the San Francisco font that Apple uses and an online format converter in case you are on Windows, because the San Francisco font file won't actually work on Windows. You will actually have to convert that to TTF first. Once you have installed fonts, the first thing that I want to do is change the size of this because it's just a little bit too high. So I'm going to make this about 60 pixels high. And of course, I will have to change this with each and every one of the navigation bars. Make sure that it is all the way to the bottom and keep doing this with all of the other bars. Once you have done that, the last thing that we have to do inside here is add a text to each of these tabs. So of course, for this, you will have to have the San Francisco font. What I want to do is zoom in into one of these tabs and start typing something into each of these. So besides displaying the icon, it also displays the name of the tab. This is something that you can see in later versions of iOS 11. The first beta didn't actually display this text, but it is now doing so. So let's add some text into this. Of course, the text also has to be white, just like its icon. And we're going to move this to be SFUI display, which is going to be the type font that is installed with the links that I shared with you. We can leave this in regular, but we will actually have to change this to be about 12 to 15 in size. So let me try this with 12 first. And I'm going to move this, of course, to be centered with the icon. And we want to change this to be aligned to the center. And now we can hold Alt-Shift on our keyboard to start duplicating this and make sure that as you duplicate this, it remains centered with the correct icon. And once you have this, you can select these 4 texts and change their opacity to 50. And of course, change their text. So this one is going to be Explore. This one is going to be Radio. This one is going to be Library. And this one is going to be Search. And then we want to copy this, all of this together, zoom back a little bit. And we want to select each and every one of the other artboards and paste this. And once we have pasted this in each and every one of the artboards, we want to change the opacity so it is the correct opacity. For example, this one will have to have a 50% opacity, while this one we will have to change to 100. So you get the idea. And so we're ready to start designing the Today tab. The Today tab will actually kind of always have the date. So we can add the first thing, which is going to be the date. For example, today is Wednesday, August 23rd. And we want to change this to be a little bit smaller. And of course, to use the San Francisco font. And let's change this to be white, but we want the opacity to be about 75%. This is just the normal thing that Apple has been doing in their designs. And make sure that this is aligned a little bit to the right. About 15 pixels from the leftmost part of the screen will be fine. And then the main thing in here is going to be the Today text, which is going to be about 25 in size. We have to change this to be the San Francisco display. And this usually is bold. And we want to change this to white as well. Maybe it's just a couple of pixels, maybe 2 pixels down. And one of the things that we're going to notice inside of iOS 11 is that we will actually, most of the time, have an ellipse to the right of this Today view. so we can display the user's profile picture. So just like with these elements being 15 pixels to the right, I want this to be 15 pixels to the left. So I will just subtract 15 from 388, which will be about 63. And now to this ellipse, I can drag my profile picture. So we have a profile picture in here, and we want to get rid of the border as well. And now, of course, to the main part of the Today view, which is the cards. And the cards are just going to be very, very big rectangles in here that we're going to align perfectly to the left of this text and to the right of this image. And that is going to have a very rounded corner. So we're going to go to the radius section and change this to be about 20 pixels. So it's going to round these corners very neatly. And of course, we're going to drag one of the album arts that we have. And we're going to start modifying this a little bit. For example, removing the border. It's going to be one of the first things that we have to do. And we're going to need text that is very similar to the one that we have in here. So I can Command D to duplicate this. And actually, I'm going to have to arrange this and bring it to front. So it's in front of this artboard. And we're going to set it about here. This is going to be the weekly discovery. And we're going to set this to the name of the album, which is Rock Symphonies. And this is kind of like everything that we need for our card. And you know, because this is Spotify, we may actually add an ellipse in the middle of this. So make sure that this is perfectly centered into the artboard, like so. And we're going to change the border to be white, make this maybe 2 pixels, remove the fill, and we're going to have to add the play icon, which we should have around because we downloaded it earlier. And so now we know that we can play this directly by pressing into that button. And so the last thing that is remaining is for us to kind of like create a list of these elements from the Today view. So what we can do is actually just select all of the elements that conform the Today view, which is this ellipse, the text, and the artwork, and Control G to group them. So they are now grouped together, and create a repeat grid. Now this repeat grid is only going to extend a little bit down here. So we can see that there is a new one in here. And what we can do is actually drag another of our artboards into this element, and notice how it only changes this one. And what we can do is select the text that is being displayed in here and change this to be black, so we can actually look at it in this white background. And you know, change the text in this one to be something like recommendations for you. And then just change this text that barely looks, but we can change it to do accordingly with the artboard, which is the black market. And you can do, of course, this with your own artwork. But you can see something in here that when I change the text in here to black, it also changed the text over here to black, and that is not exactly what we wanted. So what we can do is, once that we have created this repeat grid and we have everything set up, we can ungroup the grid, and we still have this in here, but we can actually now edit this separately from the one we have in the bottom. So now each and every one of this is independent. And the last thing we would want to do is move this, arrange this to be on the back, so it's actually behind the navigation or the tab bar. And so now our Today view is quite finished. In the next lecture, we're going to start designing the Explore tab. So now that we have this Today view ready, it's time for us to start creating the Explore view. And this is going to be a little bit different because usually on iOS 11, you won't see the card view being used on more than one of the pages. So we're going to be exploring another way of creating a nice view that relates to iOS 11. I'm again going to be basing all of the design on what we see on the App Store. So you may actually see these resemble a lot of what the App Store is like. But mainly what you will see is that, again, these two elements, the profile picture and this big bold font for the title of the page, is going to be repeated. So I am going to paste this in here, and I'm obviously going to just change the title from Today to Explore. And in here, what we're going to be using instead of the cards is something that is maybe called a carousel. I'm not entirely sure that that's how it's called, but it works like a carousel. What you will actually have is just like a main element using most of the space, and then just a tiny little piece of the next element showing in the corner. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing that we want is a couple of text in here that it's going to be mainly the title of the element. So the first thing that we're going to have in here is a title for recommendations for you or something similar, which is something that we already had in here, but the titles don't really matter. The main idea is how the layout is set. And this is going to also be a bit bold, maybe not entirely bold. Let's just make it semi-bold and change the fill to be white in here. And let's just make sure that this is perfectly aligned 15 pixels to the right. And then just below this, we're going to do something very similar to what we have with the date on the Today view. But we're going to change this to be the title of the element. So this is the title of the section. This is going to be the title of this element that is going to be displayed. And I'm just going to make it the title of one of the album artboards that we have in here. So let me just make it just a scroll, like so. And then the next thing that we want is the rectangle that we're going to be using in here, which is going to be white, but it's not going to be all the way here. So it's not going to have only 15 pixels from the right. So instead of making this 399 minus 15, I'm actually going to making this 399 minus 30. So there's actually some space to the right for us to add another element. And this is going to have also a radius in the corner, but it's going to be way smaller. It's just actually going to be about 5. We're also going to be getting rid of the border, and we're going to be making this display one of the artboards like this. And also we are going to need the play button right in the middle. Maybe this is a little bit bigger than it should, so we make this 50 by 50 because this is a smaller element. Maybe the play element should be smaller as well. And so to keep working with this, what we can do is select this, group this, and create a repeat grid that is going to go to the right. Now we want to set about 15 pixels of spacing between these elements. So I'm going to change this just a little bit. And I'm going to change the title in here. Maybe, let me see what else I have in here. I'm going to drag this into this and change the title. That is barely noticeable, but just to make the changes reflect what the artboard, the album artwork is like. And so the next thing that we can do is actually grab this repeat grid and the title of the repeat grid and create a new repeat grid that is actually going to go now to the bottom, because we're going to have actually 20 pixels of spacing between this is good. We're going to have something else in here besides the recommendations for you, maybe new releases, and maybe concerts. And so what we can do is change the title, but notice that we have a repeat grid instead of a repeat grid. That notice what is going to happen if I start changing this. Notice how it changes it in every single one of the elements. So that is not what we want. What we want is to change these items individually. So what we will have to do is go to each of these inner repeat grids and actually ungroup the grids. So we can actually start editing what is inside of these elements. So if I go ahead and change this to Metallica, you can see how now it is independent from each of the others. And we can change this to be Lindsay Stirling. And we could also drag some different images into this. So we can change how this looks a little bit to make just a statement that this is a different section. And so it looks just different, you know, because we don't want the same to be displayed everywhere. Let's actually change this in here to be the other way around, so it also looks different. Now let me just, because I have this obsession, this has to be right. And so this is going to be a new release, you know, just make sure that you change the text so it actually looks different, like it makes sense. And so we have created the Explore tab. And actually the Radio tab can be very similar to this one. So what you could do is actually just copy whatever you have in here, like drag all of these elements or just copy them and paste them into the Radio tab. Of course, you will have to change the title to be Radio, and maybe just change what is displayed in here. Change the title, change the order or the albums that are being displayed in here. So the Radio is actually going to be just an identical copy of what is inside of the Explore with different content, of course. So we now have the Explore and the Radio tab ready. In the next lecture, we're going to be covering the Library tab, which is going to be quite different from what we have created recently. So we're not going to be using either the carousel nor the card layout. We're going to be using a different kind of list. With the Explore and Radio tabs created, it's time for us to move forward into creating the Library tab. So I mentioned that this is going to be a little bit different than the cards view and the carousel view. This is going to be a list. But it's also going to be different to the list that we normally see on our library on Spotify. It's going to be a little bit bigger to reflect what we have been seeing on iOS, just bigger fonts, bigger elements, bigger text. So the first thing that we need, again, is the title of the page as well as the profile picture. So I'm going to copy this and I'm just going to change the title to be Library. And below this is where we're going to have the entire list. So the list is going to start with a rectangle. A rectangle actually is going to be a perfect square. That is going to have to be 15 pixels to the right, and it's going to be about 25 pixels from the title of the page. And here we can start dragging whatever element we want to display the album artwork. The next thing is to get rid of the border and just set the title for the album, which in this case is just going to be Requiem for the Indifferent. And we're going to set this to be about 15 pixels. And we're going to change this to be semi-bold and white, like so. We will also need this play button that we have. So I'm going to copy it from another place and paste it right above the artboard of the element that we're going to be displaying in here. So make sure that it is centered. I will actually have to move this to a 0.5 location, 50.5, to make it perfectly centered. And now we're good to go. Actually, let me make this a bit smaller. So I'm going to select both the play icon or the play button and the artboard, and I'm going to hold the shift key to make this the same aspect ratio, but move this just a little bit smaller. So I can move this a little bit to the left as well. And below this text, I will add another text. Actually, I will just duplicate this text, but make this a tad smaller at 12 pixels. It's going to have a 75% opacity, and it's going to be regular instead of semi-bold. And this is going to be for the artist name. And finally, let me just make this be at the bottom like this. Let me try it by moving this to the top. I'm not sure how it looks better, but you know, you can just create whatever looks better for you. I'm not entirely convinced by this, but you know, it's fair enough. And let me just select all 4 elements, including the play button, and group them together by Ctrl G on my keyboard and making a repeat grid. So I can move this down, and I will make the spacing between these elements to be only 15 pixels, like so. And now we have a list ready for us to start changing whatever element or whatever image is being displayed inside of the album artboard. What we can do is go ahead and select all of the album artboards that we have. So I'm going to select the 6 albums that I have in here, and all I have to do is drag them, and notice how automatically they are set to the correct value. So again, I will go ahead and change the text inside of all of these elements, but mainly our list is ready. One thing though that I am missing, and I'm going to select the list, double click inside of the list, so this is actually added to each and every one of these elements. So right here I'm selecting the first element. What I want to do is add a rectangle, and notice how it's added to all of them. That is going to be a little bit to the right, and I will have to make the repeat grid width. I will have to set some spacing in here because I don't really need this, and I'm going to leave this like this. And this rectangle, I'm going to get rid of the fill, but I do need the border, and the border is going to remain like that, but it's going to have to be a perfect circle, a perfect square. So I'm going to change this to be 30 by 30, maybe a little bit smaller. But what I want to do with this is change its rotation to be 45 degrees, because what I want to do is change this to be an arrow. So I'm going to, actually, let me just set the fill for a minute so I can double click on it and move this like this. I'm going to change the border to be 2. The border is going to be white. And this is way, way bigger than it should be. So by selecting it, I am just going to change. I'm going to lock its aspect ratio, and I'm going to set this to be 15 by 15. It looks better. And I'm going to move this to the center and to the right. So now the list is actually ready. In the next lecture, we're going to create the search view to actually complete our entire application. We have designed most of the application. It's quite ready, and we already have most of the main elements. The only one that is missing is the search tab, which is actually going to be very simple to implement. It's going to be the simplest of the tabs because mostly the search tab is just typing things, but we are going to set a list of recommendations or maybe just history of search, so it looks a little bit better, so it doesn't look like entirely empty. So what we're going to do is copy the title of another tab and paste it. This tab is not going to have the picture that is displayed on all of the other tabs because normally iOS 11 doesn't display it. If you go ahead and open, if you have iOS 11 installed already, and you open the App Store and go to the Search tab, you will see that it does not have the profile picture like all of the other tabs do. So that's the reason here. And we're going to change the title to be Search. And what we do need is the text field. Text field, or the text box, that is where the user actually writes what they're going to search for. So I am going to create a rectangle in here that is going to start 50 pixels to the left. So the X value in here has to be 15 pixels. And I'm going to set this to be 399 minus 15, which this time I'm going to make the correct calculation because I noticed later that I miscalculated in one of the other elements. So this is going to be 84. So that should be now correctly set to a correct calculation. And here the radius for the corners is again going to be small, about 5, maybe 10. Yeah, 10 looks better. And I'm going to set the border to be, I'm going to delete the border. I'm going to change the fill in here. It's actually going to be grayish. So let me find a correct gray in here. Maybe one of these grays will look good instead of this. And what we will need is a small rectangle in here that we're going to set its border to be non-existent, and we're going to center it. And what we want is to drag one of the icons that we have in here that is actually the search icon. And inside of this, we're also going to be setting this to search. And we're going to change the fill to be white. And we're going to set the text to be San Francisco. And I'm going to center this again. And that is pretty much it. This is the main part of the search. We don't really need anything else, but because this looks just empty, what we're going to do is duplicate or copy this element and move this a little bit down, something like this. I'm going to change its size to 20. And what we're going to set here is the history of the searches that have been going on. And all that I'm going to do is set some text in here that maybe one search was Linkin Park. And we're going to change this to be San Francisco. Maybe make this bold and set this to 15 and set this to be white. And right below this, actually, let me change this to be green. Yeah, it looks good in green. And I'm going to add a line in here to be dividing each of the elements. So this has to be perfectly aligned with the search bar, the search box in both sides. And it's going to have a white border like this. And so the next thing that I'm going to do is just select both of these elements, group them together, create a repeat grid all the way down, and make this only 10 pixels in separation. Let me make this, actually, let's just drop it in here, not the entire page. And so we now have the search tab completed, the app is completed. Let me go ahead and change the text in here so it doesn't look the same. And once I have done that, all there is left to do is test this out. So I'm going to run the application. And I have here the first tab, which looks very good. And when I click on the Explore tab, I get navigated, and the Explore tab seems to be selected perfectly. Go to the radio and it works, library, search, and everything seems to work fine, except I just clicked on the library. Let me go ahead and try this again. I'm on the search tab. I'll click on the library and I get navigated to the radio, so I can fix that. But everything else seems to be working okay. So let me go ahead and check what is going on in here. I'm going to go to the prototype tab, and from the search, I am going to set this, and indeed, the navigation is set to radio. Let me just change this to library. And if I go to the search tab and click on library, I am now navigated to library. So it appears to be working now. Very good. So that is it for this section. We have entirely redesigned how the Spotify application looks with how iOS 11 has been working. Make sure to share your redesigns with us. Make sure to share screenshots, make sure to share links to your artboards so we can actually explore them and see how they work. Make sure to share with the community how you've been designing, redesigning, creating new applications. So you can share with us the screenshots, you can share with us the entire prototype through the link that is created. I will actually go ahead and create one of these links so I can share with you. So in the resources for this video, you will see the link to this artboard, the one that I'm actually creating right now, so you can see how this works and type and explore it, and go ahead and do the same. I will be looking forward to see what you create with what you have learned with this course. Hey, thanks a lot for watching this video. As always, if you liked it, if you enjoyed it, smash the like button, share the video with your friends, and comment down below what you would like to see redesigned next week. And also don't forget that in the description of this video, you have a very sweet deal. If you want to learn how to use Adobe Experience Design fully, you can go ahead and grab the coupon that is linked down below, which will get you a very sweet deal. So you only pay $10 for the entire course, which is originally priced at $70. My hands are too big like this, like you know. But anyway, like, instead of $70, just pay $10 and get my full Adobe Experience Design course. This sounds like a commercial a lot. So if you don't want that coupon, just ignore this, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.